collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, the Parliamentary Ethics Committee is looking at ways to tweak legislation to ensure transparency and a level playing field, and to make sure that all fields are correctly filled in by those required to give information on their assets.
So nobody can skip steps, nobody can apply without all the documents, all the attachment that must apply.
The Bicommunal Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage receives the Europa Nostra Award.
We give a message of cooperation, coexistence, mutual respect, something very important both for the civilization of the country and for the future of the country.
And Cyprus was an important stop-off for travellers in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 15th century.
Crossing the Alps on foot and then taking a ship in Venice to travel along the Adriatic coast and through the Greek Isles via Rhodes and Cyprus to Jaffa, to the Holy Land.
I'm at our Houses of Parliament this week to talk to the chair of the Ethics Committee, because they've been discussing a very thorny issue which has been much in the news of late, but also over the last many years, and that is transparency, and particularly how there are checks on what our MPs and other politically exposed persons offer as their assessment of their assets. So we're going to talk about the Ethics Committee's discussions on how to streamline the legislation as it stands. Dimitris Dimitriou joins us now. Dimitri, let me just ask you first and foremost what you think is wrong with the current legislation, because we do have MPs filling out forms, declaring their assets and so on, but it's not done very regularly, I think, so it's very difficult to compare whether anything unorthodox has happened, let's say, over the last 1 or 2 years. How are you going to change it?
This legislation has 1, 2 or 3 major issues. One of these is that it's not specific what it asks for political exposed persons for their assets. One second issue is that it's not digitally, so you cannot compare the previous and the current application. One third issue is that there's not a check mechanism of these applications. All we agree that MPs cannot check MPs. So have to find within the bill that we are preparing the mechanism that will be checking this application for persons that they know how to do it.
Well, presumably you're talking about an audit then.
Audit, yes, audit mechanism, or maybe the 3 members committee that checks the application of all the other political exposed persons, for mayors or for people that are addressing for the President of the Republic, for the semi-public organizations. So there is a mechanism that it seems that it works better than the mechanism that we have for the MPs and the ministers.
Why do we have 2 different forms depending on whether you work for a semi-government organisation or the Parliament?
We have 2 bills because there are different perspectives of the roles. But we can have one application, and everybody agrees that the application that we have for the other bill, it's better, it's deeper, and it's like a capital statement, and we are ready to take this application and have it in the law, in the bill, that it's for MPs and ministers.
So you'd have one application
Yes,
for
the
all
same
the
application.
people who have to fill in these things. Now, the problem is that at the moment, I think, some MPs don't fill in all the different parts of the form anyway, and then when it comes to things like value of property, some of them fill it in according to the 1980
80s or 2013
valuation or whatever. I mean, it's really a mess, isn't it?
That's why we will do it digitally. The second big change is that. So nobody can skip steps, nobody can apply without all the documents, all the attachment that must apply.
And you did also say about the comparisons. Now, how often are these forms filled out? Because it is quite important, if you're going to detect anything unorthodox, that you can make a comparison between this year and last year, for example.
Now it's every 3 years. In the previous committee, under Zacharias Zachariou presidency, the discussion was to do it every 2 years. But in the discussion now in the committee, there was a suggestion to do it every 31st of December every year, to be in line with tax checks, the Department of Tax. And if it will apply digitally, it will very easy to apply every year, because you have to apply the changes of your wealth, not the application from scratch every year. So
you just update it?
Update it for the changes you have in the last 12 months. And I believe it's a crucial issue, a crucial point for transparency to do it every year. This will be my suggestion.
Can we also talk about the fact that in the last committee meeting you had, I think that you also discussed civil servants who are moonlighting. Now, we know, I think anybody who's been here any length of time knows that this is a huge problem in particular sectors. It's been going on for years and years and years. How are you going to tackle that? Because they don't actually fill in any sort of capital statement. A lot of them, I believe, don't even fill in tax forms properly. So how can you bring some sort of transparency to that? Because it's more the conflict of interest in some of these cases that should concern people.
The conflict of interest is the worst scenario, but what is very out of my mind is that the public servants are not in line with the rules of the country, and they have to ask to the Minister of Economics to take the okay to have shares in a private company, but they don't do it. This is annoying in my mind. So we ask for Mr. Michailidis, General Auditor, to send their data that they collect to the ministers to take action. And that's a very first message, that everybody must rule with the laws, with the bills. Nobody is above the bills in this country.
Right, but what sort of action can be taken? Because, as we all know, once you're a civil servant here, you're a civil servant for life, regardless of whether or not you do your job properly, or whether or not you actually don't obey the rules.
They will not lose their job, but maybe they will lose a promotion, because in their bills for their promotion, for their valuation, if they have these issues, then it's specific what they are losing. So they have to know, everybody have to know, that every action that we do, it has the consequences that must have.
Do you think that's going to work, though?
All these are small steps, but every small step for transparency, it's a bigger step for our country to feel and believe the young generation that there is a country that must hope for better days.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem here, isn't it, with this lack of transparency across the board. It's not just in Parliament or in the civil service. It is a problem that is recognised, I think, as you said, particularly by the younger generation, and they've had enough. They don't vote. They think there's no point in doing a lot of things because it doesn't make any difference.
Because they don't believe that politicians and politics and policies are changing their lives. And transparency, the lack of transparency, of course, it's a big issue. And what we have to do is to create an environment that digital governments will take action, will lead our lives. If you have to apply for a license to build your house or for a maternity leave, you have to do it digitally. So nobody can take my application above your application, or to lose your file, or to lose your attachment. That's crucial for increasing the trust between citizens and politicians.
Now, the last time I spoke to Kyriakos Kokkinos about his plans for digitisation and e-government, it's going to take a little bit of time. He's getting there, but it does take time.
It's not, we cannot do magics, but we can every day do little steps. Now, for the application for Ministry of Labour, every 2 weeks, one after another, the application goes digitally. This is very crucial, very important for those people that have need of this money. And this is what we want to build.
Well, it's going to make government faster, that is for sure.
Faster, bureaucracy is going down, but the biggest is that we can believe again in our country. We can trust the mechanism of the country.
I was going to end it there, but there's one question I have to ask you, and that is, where do the judiciary fall in all of this? Because they maintain their independence as judges and Supreme Courts and whatever, but they're not included in any of the things we've spoken about, are they?
We live in an abnormal country. Check and balances never have in this country. It seems that check and balances were between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. But after 1964, Turkish Cypriots gone, and nobody check, nobody balance with nobody. And this is a big problem. And this problem will be solved only with the biggest reform that we have to do for our country, with the solution of the Cyprus problem.
That is the head of the Parliamentary Ethics Committee, Dimitris Dimitriou.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
There was a gathering on Monday at the Home for Cooperation in the buffer zone in Nicosia for the presentation to the Bicommunal Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage of the 2021 Europa Nostra European Heritage Award and the Grand Prix Laureate in the category Dedicated Service to Heritage by Organisations and Individuals. The committee was established in 2008 and has since worked tirelessly to identify and restore monuments which have great historical, archaeological or religious importance. I caught up with the co-chairs of the committee at the ceremony. They are Dagis Hadjidimitriou and Ali Tunkai. I began by asking Dagis what the award meant to him.
It's a recognition of the work the technical committee is doing, but also it's a recognition of the importance of Cyprus as a place of culture and of the people of Cyprus showing such an interest for the monuments of the country. So I think that this award is an encouragement to all of us to continue this work. Also, I can say that with the work of the committee, we give a message of cooperation, coexistence, mutual respect, something very important both for the civilization of the country and for the future of the country.
Ali, if I come to you,
Yes.
times have been quite difficult with the technical committees being told to stop work and so on. Now, you've got it, I think, back on track. But tell me your thoughts about how much work still needs to be done and how you're going to be able to go about doing that.
Actually, we have never been told to stop, actually. Contrarily, we are encouraged to continue. I mean, this is what I would like to tell you. I mean, first of all, I would like to mention the support of the leaders. This is very, very important. Although, I mean, there are political difficulties between the two sides on the political track, I can say that we have the full support of the leaders. I mean, it is still continuing. This is a very, very good thing, actually. We are working in the field since almost 14 years. 14 years, actually, we are in the field. And we managed to actually, to a certain extent, the ongoing blame game between the two sides, we managed to a certain extent, depoliticize, desecuritize the protection of the cultural heritage. For the future, I always want to be optimistic. And I am always optimistic. And I always like to fight together with Takis. I think through our work, I mean, what is happening in our work, the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots, they are cooperating. This is very, very important. And they are producing a lot of things, actually, not only for the benefit of the cultural heritage, for the benefit of the two sides, for the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots as well.
Well, the bottom line is cooperation,
Yes.
isn't it? And the fact that with cooperation, whether it's with builders, architects, whoever is involved in these projects, they're meeting other people from the other side and working together
Yes.
with them. How important is that?
It's really, for us, it's something natural. We are working with these principles and on this track, cooperation between the two communities. So we have common groups working together, and really the cooperation is wonderful. It's very cordial and productive, I can say. We never face problem between Greek and Turkish Cypriots working on the spot.
And how many monuments have been restored through the efforts of the technical committee? Because it's hundreds, I think, isn't it?
Actually, around 80 monuments, we can say. But apart from the 80 monuments that I mentioned to you, we have also done, let's say, dozens of actually emergency support works to many, many monuments. This is also very important. I mean, if we combine these two, we can say that we have almost actually done more than 100 monuments.
And the support works, of course, mean that those monuments will hopefully remain there until you get around to doing them completely.
We are freezing the situation until we have enough financial means actually to do
the full job.
Full job, yes, restoration work there.
Wonderful stuff. That is the co-chairman of the Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage. They've been working so hard for so many years, and finally they have been recognised with the Europa Nostra Award.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
November the 10th has been designated Equal Pay Day in the European Union. It aims to draw attention to the gender pay gap and its deeper causes, including those linked to pay discrimination and transparency. Equal pay between men and women has been enshrined in EU treaties for more than 60 years, but it's not fully implemented, with women still earning about 86 cents for every euro that men earn. Cyprus Gender Equality Commissioner Iosifina Antoniou said earlier this week that according to recent Eurostat data, the pay gap between men and women in Cyprus is 10.4%. Despite the fact that more and more women are entering the job market, she said, they continue to face obstacles stunting their professional growth. Their value, she added, is not acknowledged when it comes to rising to higher positions in the hierarchy, with men continuing to occupy the highest positions of power. November 10th was chosen to symbolise the beginning of the 2 months per year during which women effectively work for free, compared to men doing work of equal value.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Earlier this week there was a lecture on travel and travellers in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 15th century. The speaker was Dr. Annika Stello, who's a historian and special collections curator at the Baden State Library. She joins us on this week's programme to tell us exactly what she was talking about and what particularly is fascinating about that era. So Annika, how did you come first of all to specialise in this area? It is a very specialised area.
Yeah. When I finished my master's degree, I looked for a job, and the job I found was in a research project on slavery in the later medieval Eastern Mediterranean. And so I stumbled upon a subject I knew nothing about, in fact, and I did my PhD thesis on the subject of trade in the Eastern Mediterranean area, especially the Black Sea area. So this is my connection with the topic of my lecture.
But the Black Sea is a little bit far away from Cyprus, so yes. What brings you to our shores this time? And I presume that over the years you expanded your area of interest, as it were.
Yes, of course. The first trade in the Black Sea in the 15th century is always trade in the Eastern Mediterranean too, because a lot of merchants were Italians, so they traveled back and forth. But then I'm working for 10 years now in the Baden State Library, where we have several manuscripts with travelogues, descriptions of travels of German travelers to Jerusalem mostly, who passed by Cyprus. And that's how I came to meet the CVAR and how we came to do an exhibition on one of these manuscripts, which is a travel account of Konrad Grünenberg, a German traveler who did the pilgrimage to Jerusalem in 1486. It took him about 9 months back and forth, and he took the usual route, which is crossing the Alps on foot and then taking a ship in Venice to travel along the Adriatic coast and through the Greek Isles via Rhodes and Cyprus to Jaffa, to the Holy Land.
So they were all stopping off in Cyprus at some point, weren't they? What sort of contribution, if any, would you say they made to the island's culture and history? Coming from so many different areas of Europe, but you're talking particularly about this German chap.
Yes. I don't know if the German travelers or pilgrims of the medieval centuries contributed to like the cultural heritage on Cyprus. But I do know that they certainly contributed to make the island known and make the specific particularities known in Western Europe, because many of them came home and wrote down what they saw, wrote down their experiences and their wonder about the differences in what they knew and what they learned in the East.
Which I find fascinating, because I'm wondering what language they communicated in with the local people.
Yes, well, they wondered that too. So it really was a problem sometimes. Most pilgrims went in groups, so they could talk to each other. But when they came to islands like Cyprus or then to Palestine, they really had difficulties.
Not many German speakers.
No, and not many Latin speakers either. So usually they looked for a translator, but they could hardly communicate with the local people themselves, except if the local people spoke some Latin or some Italian or something like that.
And the talk that you were giving earlier this week, what did you highlight? Because there was probably so much you could cover. I presume you have to look at it and say, I'm going to cover this part of it because that will be most fascinating for my audience in Cyprus.
Yes. I tried to give a kind of overview over traveling in the eastern parts of the Mediterranean at that time, which didn't go very deep. I just stayed a bit on the surface to touch as many topics as possible. So if we talk about travelers in the 15th century, we think pilgrims, we might think military, but most of them were traders of all countries around the region. So what we are talking about, if we talk about traveling, is cultural contact, cultural exchange. We have many Western merchants, for example, traveling along the eastern Mediterranean coast from Istanbul, Byzantium, down to Damietta and Alexandria in Egypt, and of course toward the west. But we also have Greek merchants, we have Turkish merchants, we have Arab merchants.
Syrians, Lebanese.
Right, and the eastern Mediterranean really was a melting pot of cultures at all the times. And in the 15th century, where we see a significant change in the power balance, it becomes more important. We have these religious conflicts between the Latin West and the Greek East and then the Muslim East. But we also have a flourishing exchange at all times in spite of those political and religious conflicts. And we even have, for example, we have several embargoes over time, mostly from the Latin countries against delivering certain goods to the Eastern Muslim countries. And we have a systematic occurrence of Italian traders mostly ignoring it. So if they are not allowed to bring slaves from the Black Sea area to Egypt because the slaves fuel the Mamluk armies, and there's an embargo on that, the Genoese just ignore it. They continue to trade slaves to Egypt and even get reprimanded by the Pope and write really interesting letters defending themselves. They would never trade slaves to Egypt, and especially not Christian slaves. They would never sell Christians to the infidel, never. But we do know that they did. So trade continues in spite of political...
Trade wars back in the 15th century, extraordinary.
Yeah.
Things haven't changed much, have they?
No. History repeats itself.
Fascinating stuff. And can anybody look online and find out more about this topic, this area that you've been talking about?
Actually, yes. There has been a lot of research going on in the last 10, 15 years, especially about the eastern Mediterranean regions. And research tends to look at the Mediterranean now as a kind of continuing space, not in terms of national history, but in terms a regional history where you can't really separate one nation from another if you want to get a true picture of the Mediterranean
well, of course,
in the Middle Ages.
We now talk about the MENA region, don't we? Middle East and North Africa, and that's very much the area that you've been discussing today.
Yes.
We've been talking to Dr. Annika Sterlo, who is a historian and special collections curator at the Baden State Library in Cyprus earlier this week, to give a lecture on travel and travellers in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 15th century. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.